Right, so joining me here, hopefully this doc's going to update and I'll find out what we're actually talking about. Just make it up. I'm going to have to make it up. This doc is not updating. Oh, I'd update on the tablet, so I'm going to switch to that instead. Always have a backup. All right, so joining me on the panel today, we've got, where is he? Alex Russell, right? You saw him yesterday talking about the web apps and the service worker. Mike Tsao, who's the engineer on Chrome apps and extensions. Adrienne Porterfeld, who spoke yesterday on permissions. Alex Komorowski, who is the product manager on Polymer and Blink. Greg Simon, right at the end there, engineering director of Chrome. And Andrew Grieve, engineer on Cordova, right? Is it? Cool. It's kind of noticed when I was writing down all the names for this is that almost everyone's name here begins with A, and I'm starting to feel like Google assigns jobs based on alliteration. Like, you know, Alex, Adrienne, Alex, Andrew, you work on apps, you see, and we've got Paul Lewis. Paul works on performance. Matt works on material design. Jake, just be happy with a job. So, yeah, we're here to talk about the future of apps. We've got some questions already that you've been submitting to the moderator, but keep them coming in via the details on the screen. There's the hashtag, the Twitter account, or on the moderator panel, and hopefully this doc will be updated live. So, first up, to kind of start us off, what is a web app and why? Alex, do you want to start with that?
Sure. So, I think people have this difference between sort of sites, which are more static content, and apps, which feel more like native things. In our perspective, it's actually much more of a spectrum. So you can apply the labels wherever you want, but ultimately different types of use cases are going to have different sweet spots for it. So something that's more like an app will feel like we'll have work offline, or we'll have things like push notifications and that kind of stuff.
So you would say at the moment there are no web apps then?
Ooh, that's a good point. So I think that you can still have an app experience, and you can use stuff that exists today to make something that's as good as you can. So one of the things that's important to emphasize too, I think, is, and one of the reasons why it makes sense to do a web app is what Darren talked about yesterday, I think, is on native you see that users are using like 12 apps a month. Now this is great if you're one of those 12 apps, but if you aren't, how are you going to get to your users? How are you going to get people to actually use your thing? And so the web is this great way to reach your users. It's zero friction. So you want to give the best experience you can, be the on-ramp. And maybe if you build a really strong relationship with your users, you'll convince them to install maybe your native app. Or maybe you won't need to if you built a strong enough web experience. So I think that's one of the reasons why it makes so much sense to really be trying to make your web experience as strong as you can.
So what would you give as an example?
No?
Yep.
Yeah. Just piling on what Alex said. The first time that the bit flipped in my head, like this is a web app, was when I first used Gmail in I think 2002 or 2003. I can't remember when. I was like, holy moly! Like it's not just reloading every time I click, or of course it's loading, but it's not. I don't see it. So it was just magical, and that was when the bit flipped for me about the web.
So is that kind of the seamlessness of one page doing all of the interacting that gave it the app feel?
It was that, but it was also the utility that I got out of using it. Like simply by typing in a URL, I was full. I got the same use as if I tapped on as if I ran Outlook or something like that, right? Except that now it was available everywhere, and I could just run it.
And we've seen, I think, well, for a lot of people, Gmail has replaced their desktop client for email, and we've seen that happen a lot on desktop. So why aren't we seeing the same in mobile? What's in our way, Mike?
So I think there are three main reasons why the web versus native are where the web can improve. First, obviously, is performance. And I think Ryan went into a great amount of detail yesterday about what we're doing there. We've got 60 frames per second, and if we keep doing our job, we'll actually leave some budget for you to do some work within that 16 milliseconds. Capabilities, Alex is definitely showing the path that we're taking there. Service worker is going to help a lot with the offline case, and then on capabilities, if Adrienne's work with the permissions API allows us to bring some of the more security-sensitive capabilities to the web. That's a good thing. But also, once you've built this performant, capable app, what next? And I think discoverability or stickiness, or I think ease of recall, is that the term that you used yesterday? Yeah. Those are the things that are the difference between an app that you've built and an app that actually other people end up using, because they can find it, they can get back to it. And add to home screen, certainly. Notifications, that's another more subtle way of reminding people that you're there.
So why do we need that stuff on mobile? Because we don't seem to need it on desktop.
I think we do. I think we do. I think that the web did well with its strengths on desktop, but mobile is something that's with you all the time, and sometimes there are different contexts when an app is more relevant than it was on a desktop.
Yeah.
We're certainly in a mode of operation, and I think that we're beginning to see some of the limits of the web in that respect.
Yeah, we need add to home screen on mobile because it's just really hard to type URLs on mobile.
But we've got add to home screen now, so problem solved, right?
No. First of all, it's buried in the UI. Like you have to tap and scroll and find it.
But we're the ones that have buried it,
well,
right? We control the browser. Why have we done that?
I can't answer that.
Well, I can give it a shot.
The other thing is most websites aren't built to run offline. They're built assuming you're sitting at one end of like a T3. And this was okay 10 years ago when most of the web was consumed on desktop. But now, if you install a Java app on Android or a C app on iOS, you take all the loading hit up front, right? And that first, as soon as I tap it, it just runs and just works. The web, I'm not sure if it's cached or not, or I jump into an elevator and suddenly I've got 8 out of 10 resources loaded. Oh, I can't use it.
Just to follow up, exactly what Greg said, but it's also the case that we haven't had a strong signal until now that something is appy. We haven't known that something is going to work well as an app, so it's the right thing to do to leave the user in control of whether or not to decide that something should be saved to their home screen. But what we haven't done or haven't given ourselves to date has been the ability to know that something wants to be treated like an application. And so I think the manifest format and service workers together give us that strong signal. You've got responsive breakpoints, you've got a manifest, you've got service workers. You're probably an app. And that's the sort of signal that we can finally use to raise the priority of that kind of UI and actually ask the user, hey, this thing is an app. You're getting a lot of value out of it. Do you want to keep it? Do you want to have it on your home screen? Without, you sort of having to divine through use that it's one of these appy-like things.
So what's the signal then for that? Is it the frequency of visiting or the amount of time the user spends on the site?
We have talked quite a lot about a combination of factors, and I think that the strongest contenders so far are the existence of a service worker and a manifest, and some amount of reuse. Going to a website once shouldn't get you a prompt or an info bar that says, hey, install our app. I mean, that's maybe the worst part of the mobile web today. Yeah. And so people talk to us and they're like, well, you're going to add a prompt. And I'm like, well, have you used the mobile web? Have you actually gone to any websites on your phone? Because if you do, you are seeing a banner that's worse than that all the time, every time. So we'd like to do better than the status quo, which is that. But only when users are re-engaged with something that's valuable to them. So I think that's going to be the dynamic. But again, we don't want to gate the capabilities and permissions that we were talking about yesterday based on some sort of an install floor or some upfront grant where users have to decide to keep something to get a useful website. If I go to an airline website, I should be able to have it notify me later in the background, months later maybe, without me ever having to decide to take up some valuable home screen real estate for it. That's maybe something I want to do, but it should be optional as well.
Yeah, cool. So if we'll take live questions. Actually, there you go. You're there. You can ask a question. Well done.
So one big difference between native apps and mobile apps, web apps, is that you can ask permission during the life of the use of the application. Where when you install an app right now on Android, for example, you grant those ahead of time. The thing is, if you head to home screen now, all of a sudden you have the browser UI that really disappears and you don't have any mechanism to go in and grant or revoke permissions. How do you plan on solving issues like that?
You have a really good point that that is a challenge, and that's something that we're actively working on, and we'd like to change. We want to, we have two competing goals here. One is to give the app/website as much screen real estate as possible, and the other is we do want to have, an entry point and a way to ask user for permission. So I have to be honest, we don't have a perfect solution to this yet, but this is something that you will be seeing us working on in the near future.
So if we have an add to home screen, are we going to sort of auto grant some permissions there?
That's a good question. So we are looking at tying some types of permissions that are not privacy sensitive to signs of positive user engagement. And I expect that adding to home screen will be one of those signs of positive user engagement.
So when we add to the home screen, you get this kind of immersive full screen experience, but that's at the cost of the URL bar, which native apps don't have. Isn't the URL an important part of the web? I mean, Andrew, so with Cordova, you don't have a URL bar, right? I mean, are URLs dead now? Do we not need them anymore?
Right. So I'd say with Cordova, you get all the system integrations for task switching. So yes, you can't refresh the page, but you can easily kind of swipe the app away and restart it, if you like that URL bar for the refresh button. But you do actually lose out on things like being able to copy and paste that link. And it's actually, I'd say it's one of the concessions we make to get ourselves into the app stores is losing that ability. So I think it is great how Chrome is getting rid of the address bar when you're scrolling, but you always know how to get back to it, and that's a good thing.
But with add to home screen things, we've lost it, right? Are we happy with that?
No, I don't think we're necessarily satisfied with the current state. Both between the question of recall of site settings, getting back to permissions that you can modify to the previous question, and the ability to get back to the URL bar. I think those are things that we want to do. And the window treatment that we showed yesterday for this desktop standalone treatment is going to have some affordances for that. We still have to figure out what that's going to be on mobile. We don't have an answer for that yet, but it's a clear area that we are looking at and do want to improve.
Yeah, so if I don't know if you saw this yesterday in Alex's demo, but there's a very, very minimalistic URL bar at the top on desktop. And one thing we're exploring is figuring out how to bring something like that to the web where it doesn't take up as much space, or maybe there are heuristics for when we show it or don't show it.
We'll take a question from the audience.
Hi, I'm Rachel from Control Group, and we actually do a lot of client products where, like this past year, I did a Chrome web app that, the hope was it could just exist and not be supported. Unfortunately, that also meant locking down the version. And I know this is touchy because I know you guys like to make sure everything's up to date. And we did follow the documentation for the set interval to control to make sure that things wouldn't look funky. If there's a new W3C spec for some kind of CSS property that would make things look funny, and yet it's still updated. So we ended up having to use a crude proxy type of situation, and I was wondering if there's any plan to allow those kinds of permissions for companies that really want to own the app, and it's not really for the public use.
We should probably talk offline about this because I'd like to find out more about the specific problems that you're having.
Sure.
But generally, I'd say that we have this philosophy with the open web, if I can speak for the entire open web, that when you add something to the platform, you can't take it away. And with very few exceptions, we've kept that promise. So if there is something going on in the Chrome runtime that you're relying on for Chrome apps, we should be in touch and make sure that we haven't had regressions. That probably wasn't intentional. There are a few cases where, oops, security issue. We've got to do something. We don't have a choice there. But generally, if you're trying to lock down the runtime, that's probably a symptom of a larger problem.
Okay, we'll talk later.
So we had a question in from Twitter about, so you were saying that service worker is going to be an indication of something that looks like an app. For people who are wanting to use service worker soon, I mean, it's not on Android at the moment. What do people do to be able to use it? And even if it does hit Android, well, when's it arriving in other browsers, and what can we do in the meantime?
Well, it's in M40, the first version, in Chrome 40.
But does anyone in this room have access to M40?
On desktop, they do.
On desktop, right?
And you can build it from source, and you can build a content shell from source and run it locally.
Get all of your users to download the source. It's only a few gigabytes, right? And we can do.
There's also a build of the content shell inside the Polyair repo of the demo that I showed yesterday. That's all open source, and there's a build of an APK for that. It's not going to auto-update because it is just content shell. It's just a dummy system. M40 is going to hit beta for Android in, I think, about 2 weeks, sometime just post-Thanksgiving. So look for that, and that'll be your chance to play with it on mobile first.
Yes, this is a temporary problem because it's on an M40.
Yeah, but desktop is how you can get it today. Dev Channel or Canary has it right now.
But what about Safari? They don't have an implementation yet. So I mean, people can't use Service Worker until we've got it in all of the browsers, right?
Well, the thing that I failed to mention yesterday, and I think it's implicit in the model, but I screwed up by not mentioning that service workers are progressive enhancement for the network. They are a way for you to take web content and make it offlineable. You can build if you architect your application correctly, you should absolutely be able to use the exact same content with and without a service worker. And because service workers only install after that first load, you sort of have strong incentives to do that. And Jake and I thought long and hard about this to try to make sure that what we weren't doing was creating a world of spinners and loading screens where people felt like they had to wait till a service worker was ready before they could do anything. We want you to keep building websites that are friction-free and ephemeral and just work when someone hands you a URL. So
it will be possible to, when you detect that a service worker hasn't installed, to show a spinner and then wait for it to install and then refresh the page to kind of create a sort of blocking experience until the service worker's there. Yeah, if you do that, I will hunt you down.
The service worker is a great example of an API that's sort of like an escalator, right? When an escalator fails, it turns into stairs, right? When an elevator fails, well, you're stuck on that floor, right? And service worker, I mean, Alex took the Polymer Topeka app from I/O and which was not designed for offline, and added one service worker, which is about this much text, and it just worked offline. It was just amazing. Like, I've never seen anything like it. So
yeah, the way Polymer sort of encourages you to architect your applications, by the way, with it sort of loading a shell and then you loading content in and doing data binding, is incredibly compatible with this sort of style of things. Other frameworks are too. If you're using Ember, if you're using some of these other taller frameworks that sort of have a data model on the client side and are doing synchronization about that data model, you're going to be in a much better spot to take advantage of these capabilities early on.
I think also with service worker, like as an end user, it's so obvious when there's a service worker installed. The experience, it loads so much faster on subsequent loads. It works when you go in the elevator, and so like it's so obvious to your end users. And because you can layer on easily, I think it's going to be the developers are really going to want to adopt it soon.
We'll take another question from the audience.
So I actually want to roll things back, say 2 questions, kind of the app, add to home, Cordova context. From a developer's perspective, if I want to build an app that's meant to work like an app and wrap it up in Cordova, I've already taken care of everything from my side, so I can make sure the user has a good experience. Whether they want to use a menu button to share or whatever behavior needs to be added, that's there. Right now with add to home screen, and I didn't even realize this till last night, I was talking to a user that isn't technical. You add to home screen any website, and you can create kind of a bad experience. It's hard maybe a week later to share that with somebody because the URL bar is not there, the menu button with share is not there. And I think about the new web manifest concept. Maybe that can be more of a trigger to say if someone adds to home screen any website that wasn't really indicating that it was meant to be used that way, it's a little more of a webby experience. And as a developer, maybe I can do something with a manifest to say if someone adds this to a home screen or installs my web app, that it behaves more like an app as opposed to it being assumed or inferred so loosely.
So I believe that the URL bar is opt-out still, right? It's a meta tag that triggers that. But I think the problem we had is that a number of out-of-the-box web starter kits, maybe not the web starter kit, but has that meta tag in there by default, which is, I guess, it's part of the problem.
Yeah. Because I picked a random site when I did that last night, so that would make sense. All right, well, thank you.
Cool. So web apps are still hamstrung by a lack of capabilities. When will we get access to things like media galleries, USB, Bluetooth, and all the good things that you can get on native problems? I guess, Adrienne, it's basically your fault, isn't it? That you want this web thing to be secure and not harm users?
So first of all, I really wish I had an evil cackle because I would like to use it right now. Yes, it is our fault, but we're trying to figure out a good way to expose these, a roadmap for exposing all these capabilities without having negative security and privacy impacts. I think we're making good headway. You know, we have stories for Bluetooth, for notifications, for Get User Media, and for many of the ones that are coming up soon. And we're trying to come up with a generalizable way to approach this problem in the future. But in the meantime, there is going to be a lot of iteration, both in Chrome and in other browsers, that hopefully will get us to figure out what the best approach is.
And just one thing to add to that, the reason that we chose Web Bluetooth at this fairly early stage in this effort is precisely because it's a frickin' scary API. If you think about visiting a website that talks to your devices that aren't even touching your computer, that is a really scary proposition. And if we are able to crack this nut, it's really tantalizing, because think of all the other things that are sort of lesser classes of the lesser instances of the same sort of class: USB, serial, NFC. If we can do this without breaking the web security model, it's very promising.
I just want to remind everyone, one of the reasons that you have so low friction in the web is that people aren't afraid to click on the links. And so it's really important to maintain that. That's one of the really important aspects of low friction on the web.
Yeah, I want to just agree with that, because if you think about how native applications work, the correct model for understanding the security implications of a native application is that you've given the developer of that application a shell on your most private computer, right? You've given them a local user account, basically. And that's generally an okay thing to do, but that model is very different to the web model, and we're in a relatively good place to start from. We haven't given people, you know, tremendously powerful upfront grants that users can't revoke. We haven't created APIs that users don't have control over, or we can't give users control over. So as we extend these new capabilities, I think we're going to have, we're going to be making even more work for Adrienne and her team to help make it easier to manage this stuff. I know that a lot of that's already coming in 40 and 41 with better site settings, like you showed yesterday, for revocation and managing these permissions. But as we roll those out, those are all going to stay under user control. And as a developer, the onus is going to be on you to make sure that you handle the situation where the user has either denied or rescinded your privilege to do it, just like Adrienne's slide showed yesterday.
So what do we find people using Cordova for? I mean, because surely this is a great signal for what we should be working on getting into a web standard.
Yeah, it's certainly a good spot to check out what people are using it for. Actually, this is a little bit of a funny question for me, because I actually find most Cordova apps are using it just to get in the Play Store. They're not actually using half the permissions they're even asking for, which is actually really annoying when you install an app. And then kind of another thing I thought about around these lines, even access to hardware sounds scary, but it's really, in the grand scheme of security, not all that scary. Like, I'm a bit more scared when an app asks for my contacts than, you know, like personal information, rather than my devices. So I can just turn my printer off or whatever.
Security team might have a slightly different opinion.
So, no, I agree with all that, but I was saying, one of the things about the open web I think is scary is like access to your file system. And so the browser has taken a really, I think, conservative approach to this on the desktop, and it's kind of worked fine for the most part until now. So I think, you know, finding the right solutions to this is important, but really taking that conservative approach is what builds your users' trust, and it's really important.
I want to come back to this, but we'll take a question from the audience first.
Thanks. One of the main use cases to build a mobile web app and then wrap it into Cordova is to have access with maybe a single code base to both marketplaces. But still, the offline story is pretty bad. Even in a Cordova web app, you have to do a lot of things yourself. And so Service Worker looks like a fantastic way to do that. So if I go all the way down and I try to build a Chrome web app and then I use CCA and wrap it, is it going to work on iOS? And how are we going to get to that? And even the app that you've published yesterday, so you use App Cache also to make it work offline, because you can't use Service Worker on my phone. And eventually, if I'm on an iOS and I download it as a web app, then I suppose I can run it in the Chrome browser. So I need to use the Chrome browser in order to access those capabilities. I won't be able to use Safari. And then if I push it in Cordova, what's that whole story going to look like?
Sounds like you have a really good understanding of the current state of affairs, actually. So I mean, offline with Cordova is for most apps pretty straightforward because you just pack all your assets there. But I think the kind of question here is like, what are we doing to try to make Service Worker maybe work in Cordova or try to make Cordova look more like the story that we've been selling this conference? So that's a wonderful idea. We are going to work on seeing what we can do there.
So we got a question in from Twitter from Marcus Caceres at Mozilla. The SSL certs are still a problem to obtain, especially for subdomains. We're blocking a lot of APIs on HTTP and making them HTTPS only. What are we doing to address the problem of making it easier for users to use HTTPS?
So that's a really big question. I want to acknowledge that there has been some pain in this space, particularly if you want to use scripts or resources from other websites that don't support HTTP. But things are getting a lot better. For example, Cloudflare offers free universal SSL now, and we're trying to build more developer tools into Chrome to be able to tell you the status of all the resources on your website. And so we are cognizant of this, and we are trying to build tools to help you with it. But it is necessary. You don't want, your ISP, the guy sitting next to you at the coffee shop, you don't want these people to be able to use these dangerous privileges. So although there is a little bit of pain that comes with it, it is a really important fundamental part of just being able to add these new APIs to the web.
One of the native apps I use frequently is a podcasting app. And I wouldn't be able to recreate that on the web because most podcasts are served over HTTP. Do we need some kind of gap? I mean, are we lacking pragmatism here with that? Or is it bad that native apps can do that?
I actually think that native apps in general are not always great about using HTTPS when they should. And this is actually a problem. I think the web here in some ways has an advantage because it's easier for the user to see what the security status of a page is, whereas in native apps, that's often not the case. Plus, native apps often try to use HTTPS, but perhaps don't quite get it right and actually validate the certificate. So in some ways, I actually think the browser has an advantage in this corner. And I'm hoping that native apps get brought to where we are right now in the browser.
So are we out to destroy native apps, right? Or are there things that the web will never be able to do, so native apps will have to be there for that?
So that question presumes that this is a zero-sum game, which is absolutely untrue. So there's always going to be some cases that are really great for native apps, but we want to make sure that developers have choice and they can use the right tools for the job. So again, if you're in the torso or the tail and you want to reach your users and get as easily as possible, the web is an amazing option for you, right? And we want to empower that like we did on desktop with more and more capabilities, more and more power, so you can build better and better experiences while maintaining that zero friction. But it's fundamentally not a zero-sum game.
Yeah, I sort of think back to even on the web, like how we deliver experiences across the entire range of devices that you can see out on the device wall. The search team, the Google search team, delivers dozens of different experiences based on device capabilities. Over time, they've got different renderers, different pipelines for giving you different copies of the same 10 blue links with different features attached to them. And that's something that you do when you're trying to reach different users at the highest fidelity they can possibly have. And so the question, like you say, isn't, are there going to be places for native apps or web apps? It's more like, how do you reach that first set of users, that largest first set of users with your largest investment? And then how do you reach that incremental set of users as your application grows? The web can be an incredible reach and enabler for you to get in front of more people, but today it has missed some early advantages in terms of UI access. And so I think the goal for us is to make your investment in your website a much more attractive proposition. Make it so that you can reach more of your users more easily by building your website well, and then figure out what you're going to do to reach that other set of users in those other use cases. That may involve a native app.
So what would the native app do that the website can't? What's that area that is for native?
I think you can look at like the things that are available in Cordova, for example, today to get a taste of some of the things that you can do in native apps that you can't do on the web. And the web does trail some of this stuff sometimes because we have to figure out the security model. We have to figure out how to responsibly bring it to the web. We have to figure out which of these APIs that people have pioneered in native is worth bringing to the web, or which of these are just sort of dead ends. So there's always going to be that thing. If you want the latest and the greatest, you need access to the absolute most cutting edge in terms of performance primitives or what have you. Native is a really attractive option if you're trying to squeeze every last bit out of it. However, for the vast majority of people, what's really important is reaching your users and being realistic about the fact that it's very hard to get people to install, to convince people to install your app often.
Yeah, just going back to the question that you asked there, Jake. I mean, certainly a huge advantage of the web is that I don't have to download 38 megs before I start to engage. Sorry, download 38 megs before I have to log in, right? I can just sort of like off the cuff load something and like be there, right? But there's lots of things that we can learn as on the mobile web from apps, from Java and and iOS apps. For example, web on desktop. Most desktop computers are kind of the same. Like they don't have like a vast array of sensors that are very different. They all have a screen and a mouse, and like that's it. But when you're talking about mobile devices and watches and VR headsets, and it seems like every month there's some new piece of hardware that, oh geez, I really wish I had an API for that, right? But the web doesn't have that kind of flexibility, right? It takes years to get these sort of like IDLs in, whereas with a built-in app, with a Java app, you can just give them a jar and they can talk to the device. So there are gaps on both sides, and we're working on those.
Yeah, more on the gaps on both sides. I just want to emphasize that native's not perfect either. There are many attributes of the web, like linkability in particular. You can't easily deep link into an app. Maybe Android intents are one solution to that, or composability. But I'm looking forward to a time when app developers aren't facing this document-centric versus app-centric decision, and they're kind of just saying, I'm going to go with what works for me. And then some apps that happen to be implemented on the web are going to take advantage of linkability. They're going to take advantage of this fantastic ecosystem that we have. And at that point, the native platform maintainers are going to say, okay, yeah, I agree, we are competing, and this is an area where we have to start competing. Mm-hmm. And the competition that I think is going to come out of that will be incredible on both sides.
Before we take a question from the audience, I want to kind of talk to the rest of the audience. What features do you want most from an app? All the things we talked about, Bluetooth, whatever, that maybe require permissions, if you could have one of them on the web now, what would it be? Shout it out. It's fine, great. Should we just all go?
API version.
Come on, we'll base our next year of work on what you shout out right now.
Polyfill for service worker.
Polyfill for service worker. Camera API. What was the other one of it? More system control. What was that? Sorry. Push notification.
Coming.
So
soon.
We'll go to your question because it might be the same one that I've got written here.
Well, it might be. So when are we going to get a polyfill for service worker?
So I had a very...
I have bad news and bad news for you.
Well, the question we had from Twitter is very similar. Can Chrome on iOS support service worker before Safari on iOS does as well? And I guess that would be in the shape of a polyfill.
So if the way to think about this is that there is a land before time where you start typing a URL into the address bar, and then some user agent gets a whack at actually making the HTTP request, forming it, sending it out to the network, and bringing something back. Polyfills today all operate in the context of the document that comes back, right? Some script is executing inside that document. Service workers and gears before it were all about that moment before time, that moment before your document even exists, what it is that you do to intercept that network connection. So before I joined Google, we had built a little proxy as part of a toolkit that I had before that was actually sitting on the user's device, and it just ran a little HTTP proxy, and it basically did the same thing. And Gears did roughly the same thing in the IE era. And so those are solutions, but those solutions have to be relatively invasive. So from a document, having a polyfill for service workers isn't going to work for that first document load. What you can do, however, is to build your applications in a way that's compatible with service workers, where you have an application shell and then you load content. Today, almost every document that we send down the wire has expires headers that are set to 0. We cache all of our resources, but not that main shell. Something you can do is actually set that document to go longer in the cache. We don't do it today because it means that you can't keep fresh content. But if you build your application with a shell and then a runtime inside the shell that's actually checking the network to actually go see if you can do stuff, you may be able to get some of that behavior back. But you have to construct your application in a way that's friendly for application centricness. And once you're there are some strategies available. It's not a polyfill, and we can't make you one, unfortunately. But to the Chrome for iOS question, because Chrome on iOS is actually there mediating between that document load and what comes back, it could, in theory, run a JavaScript context to mediate that. It's possible for us to do it. We haven't done it yet. It's not currently in M40 for Chrome for iOS, but that's something that we can look at.
Yeah, we would really love for mobile Safari to have this feature. Don't get us wrong. We would really, really love it.
Please direct these questions at your friendly local Apple engineers.
Yeah, and a good way to do this, right, is build really awesome experiences that your users love. And they can point to and say, wow, it works so amazingly well, and it works in the elevator on the subway in Chrome.
Yeah,
this is great.
I mean, even though we're hanging all of these other APIs off of Service Worker, like push notifications, et cetera, I still think that like 99% of the use of it's going to be loading, because you can load the site so fast with a Service Worker. It's unbelievable. So anyway, try it out.
So we talk about the ephemerality of the web being like one of the web's real benefits. But if I've got like a local to-do list or an email that failed to send is now in an outbox or flight details, I don't want those things to be ephemeral. Like, I think users will lose trust in the web if the browser ephemerates their data away on a whim, which is what it kind of currently does. So what can we do about that? Greg? Alex?
So we have been thinking hard about this problem in the context of service workers. When we looked at the way that we've been dealing with persistence for storage to date, we came away a little bit unhappy with our former selves. Today, there is only one storage class for a file system API in Chrome that can be marked as persistent, and that's a problem, because it means that your application isn't constructed just out of things that are stored in the file system API. It's constructed out of JavaScript, it's constructed out of markup, it's constructed out of CSS, and a lot of other resources that you may be holding onto in IndexedDB or some other storage mechanism. And today, those aren't durable. And we don't really have an API that lets us do that. We've put together a skeleton of an API that would sort of let you make an entire origins storage durable, such that it would be opted out of the normal cache clearing or sort of evaporation of stuff based on least recently used sort of heuristics. And that's an API that I think we're going to continue to play with. One of the things that service workers are going to let you do is to understand what is in your caches. But again, I think in general, we haven't done the strongest job of making the amount of space that's available on a device available to you as a developer, and I think we're going to continue to look hard at quota, giving you more of it by default, making the quota API more useful, and giving you storage pressure events so that you can start to prioritize inside a service worker what is going to be what you need to throw away when you're under pressure. So we're going to give you more control and more visibility.
So I think an API like that's the easy part of the problem, right? I mean, it could be even boiled down to just a single function call, but surely the hard part is sort of how to communicate that to users, right? To say, like, what we're going to tell users that, oh, this website's now not ephemeral. Like, how are we going to deal with that?
I'm not sure I'm actually the best person to answer that.
Well, so we have talked about what it might mean to have UI, maybe in this keep action, where we have offered a website to you to say, hey, would you like to hold on to this, as maybe a strong sign, as you were saying earlier, about engagement and use that might allow us to classify an application as being more important. I think it's also useful for us to have an API that will let developers understand the situation that you're currently in, and that's something that I think we can get done quickly.
Exactly. So like, if you as an app developer know that they have stored state in your application that they would be mad if it was now gone, you want to some way to figure out that you can alert the user of like, hey, if you don't do something, it's going to...
One of the things that's critical about all these APIs is that what you're seeing here is that we're designing the API to be asynchronous. All these APIs are asynchronous. All these APIs can fail. And that means that we're going to allow users to be in control. What that eventual UI is going to be across different user agents in browsers is something that I think we're going to spend the next couple of years iterating on. I think we don't know all the answers yet, but I'm excited that what we can do is continue to design these APIs that have time built into them so that Mozilla can take a different view of what UI you should give, if any, than maybe we do.
I know when my dad feels like his laptop's running slow, one of the things he does as part of his routine is sort of clear everything out of his browser, like, you know, all the checkboxes, off it goes, because he feels like that's kind of like a non-destructive action that's going to somehow improve the speed of his laptop. But in a more appy web, is he going to start losing data, or is that going to be the equivalent of him deleting the system folder or whatever?
This is actually a really good question, because you know, we want to respect people when they say, hey, clear my history, blow away all the state. You know, that's an important thing that we really want to do if that's actually what the user wants. But we have a sense that sometimes people are doing this not for privacy reasons, but rather because they have an idea that it'll make their computer faster, or that they think they're running out of memory, but maybe they actually aren't. So we're trying to figure out how to balance users' desires with what they actually want to happen in the end.
So one of the new APIs that I think people are asking for, and we're certainly excited about, is having push notifications. So we've both shown code in talks for here's how you register for push, and here's the event you'll get in the service worker. But what about the stuff that's server to server? I mean, is that going to be standard, or are users going to have to deal with a completely separate communication channel for if they're talking to Apple, or if they're talking to Google, or if they're talking to Mozilla?
That's another great question. So today, the state of the world is that you send push messages to devices, and those messaging services tend to be tied to the operating system that the user is running. And so, for instance, for Android, that's Google Cloud Messaging. For iOS, that's APN. APM, I don't remember the exact acronym, but Apple's push messaging system. And so it's likely that what's going to happen, or for Mozilla, they'll have their own system. What's likely going to happen is that these, for some period of time, are going to continue to be device or provider specific, where you will get a registration at your application about the registration ID that comes from the device, and you can know what that device is. And then you can have the conversation with the back end. Today, all of those protocols are different. One of the things that the team that's been working very hard on this in London and produced all the code for the demo yesterday have done is that they've started a standardization effort around that server-to-server communication channel. Today there isn't one, and we're keen to get that done. And I think everybody who's been participating in this, Mozilla's been participating in this process with us, is also keen to see some sort of a backhaul or northbound protocol standard so that we can eventually get to a place where your application server may continue to have to speak to a different server based on what device the user is talking, but you don't have to speak a different protocol to talk to that server.
So I think at the moment we've got it's a key in the manifest, isn't it, to sort of
Yeah, so that key is a regrettable side effect of having to use GCM or Apple's push system today, and I think eventually that can go away, but we don't have plans yet in the initial release to remove it.
Do we feel that we ditched vendor prefixes in both JavaScript APIs and in CSS, which I think was a great thing. Are we sneakily bringing those back with meta tags and the manifest?
So I actually have a much different view of vendor prefixes than most people. If you want no progress but real stability, you can have it, but you can't also have new features. It's important to note that you have to prioritize these incentives. And so if you don't let your platform breathe, if you don't let it ever inhale, it can never continue to live. So it's important that we find ways for our platform to continue to breathe, to continue to figure out what the next features should be, and then bake them in and make them stable. And so I think that vendor prefixes have a bad rap because we have done some of them wrong. So for instance, with the CSS vendor prefixes, we, Chrome, shipped WebKit Dash, not Chrome Dash or Google Dash. And every other WebKit-based browser did exactly the same thing. So that was us. It wasn't a vendor prefix. It was a project prefix. That was the wrong thing to do. And I think it's good that we've gotten past that. As we do this in the future, I think we've been talking productively with other browser vendors about ways that we can sort of on a schedule and for a limited set of developers, break features so that you know that if you're using something new, it's going to break, it's going to change. And I think that's a new tactic that we're looking at to hopefully enable us to zoom ahead and give you the features that you want, but only if you're going to be engaged in the process with us.
Right, and because obviously the prefixes were supposed to be this warning sign to developers of like, hey, you can use this, but just it's not fully baked yet, it might change. But realistically what happened is people just learned that was the, they go to Stack Overflow, you just paste in this thing and it works. Great.
Yeah,
so it's hard to change
when I
later.
think of vendor prefixes and meta tag, I think of browser vendors trying to ship things faster, right? Because no one, there's a ton of risk in being first, as Dimitri said earlier, and also not that many people have the stomach for all the arguing that goes on in all of these standards groups. Right? I mean, I certainly don't. Alex does. Yeah. So when I look at other platforms, when I look at iOS, when I look at Windows, when I look at when I look at Android, the web is the only platform that must render everything from the beginning of time. Everything from archive.org, it has to be able to work. Otherwise, we've somehow failed. No other platform has this problem, and so it's very, very hard for us to experiment and ship fast. But we all want to ship things faster, and we are committed to finding ways to do that.
So with well-built native apps, one of the things I really enjoy is I install them and I run them, and it's already able to tie data to me as a user, even in the cloud. Is that something we want from the web? Some sort of like single identity that the browser offers, or is that adding a kind of centralization that is anti-web?
Oh, so the centralization is anti-web at the end. So I think identity is definitely something that makes sense when we're investigating how to do this correctly, because again, if you want to opt in as a developer and use that thing that's already there just to smooth over the initial experience, that obviously makes sense. The way Android does it, if I understand correctly, is there are identity providers on the system, and for example, obviously Google is one of them, but Facebook also does it, and others can as well. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be that, if you're talking to an identity provider, it has to be like some closed, centralized system. You as a developer could theoretically decide, hey, this is the one I want to go with. I'm going to go with that one. I'm going to just, So I think that this is something we're definitely interested in. We're looking at how to do this correctly. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that's like, well, you must buy into this the way that this group does it.
Sounds like web intents. Should we start that again?
Maybe.
So one of the things that I think maybe you were alluding to, Greg, is that we're looking at ways of having a relatively small API surface area that allows us to expose more capabilities more quickly, but do them in a very vendor-specific way, right? But not in the bad way, in the sense that, like, if I talk to your website, I'm only talking to your website, right? If I'm talking to you, I'm talking to you. I'd like to have a conversation with you, not with some random third party who may be implementing the same API. That's a place where, imagine talking to a service worker that Chrome has implemented, but it's only available at chrome.com. Right, that's the sort of capability system that you could have over post message, but it's just tied to an origin. And we don't expect web-hosted APIs not to break. They break all the time. It's just sort of what happens on the web. It's just content. So that's the sort of area where we can imagine creating a broader ability to launch new features quickly and maybe integrate deeper with the underlying system, like Intents did.
Right. But that moves from an IDL binding to a protocol binding, which is a lot more flexible, right? You can version it, you can like sniff to see if it's there, and a lot more stable in that sense.
So if we're getting all these cool new toys, I mean, they're going to have to be behind some kind of extended permissioning system. Are we going to head towards a massive in-browser spam problem where you visit a site and it's going to be this site wants to know your location, it wants to access your microphone, it wants to know the gender of your pets, and is this?
I'm intrigued at the website that needs to know the gender of your pets, but I think if we were to do nothing, yes, that would happen. But we're aware that this is a problem, both in terms of, it's a problem for everyone. It's a problem for developers. It's a problem for users. And so we're taking steps to try to prevent it. So that's why I mentioned earlier looking at types of positive user engagement to figure out what things the user might wish to, non-privacy sensitive things the user might wish to automatically grant to a website. And also the inverse of that, looking at crowdsourcing, if a large number of users are unhappy about a website having something, maybe we shouldn't be asking users about it because we know they're going to say no. We're also looking at things like setting up smart defaults and new types of UI, like a chooser model where the user is selecting from amongst a set of things as part of the flow instead of just answering binary yes or no questions. So we're taking several approaches to try to prevent the infobar explosion world.
Is there something we can do there to prevent the Android problem where there's a big long list of things and people are like, yeah, whatever. To not really, it becomes the terms and conditions sort of problem.
I think actually the people sitting here can help us with that. I really hope that websites don't try to work around us to be popping up long lists of permission requests on load. I think that doing that does the entire web a disservice. So first of all, I don't think it'll actually work out in your favor. I think people will say no to that because they haven't gotten a justification yet. And it also hurts the user because now going to every website is immediately popping up without any context these questions that are scary and they don't know how to understand. So I like to hope that the web naturally avoids this because it seems to maybe not be the best experience for the web for websites to be doing this.
But it's not a good experience for that site in particular, too, right? I mean, users are going to be, what the hell is this? They're going to bounce. So it's bad for the whole web if you do that. It's also bad for your own particular site if you do that.
I think a good bad example of this is actually Google Web Search. If you look at that on a mobile, you go there, you type in your search thing, and it comes up, Google wants to know your location. It's like, well, I bet it would. But I'm not going to tell it. But if it was a button that said, localize your search results, I might, when I felt it would be relevant, I might press that and it'll go, Google wants to know your location. Like, yes, fine, you will need to know that.
Yeah, we have this problem right now because currently there's no way to find out if you have geolocation without trying to use it. So I mentioned in my talk yesterday the permissions API, which currently both Mozilla and Chrome are interested in, which will help with this type of thing because you can check if you have it or not, then you can use it on load, and if you don't have it, then you should wait until the user does some kind of, turns on a feature or actually makes the search before you ask the question.
So what do we think the way forward here is in the future? If we have things like caching, so we can get page load fast, we have navigation transitions to get from one place to another. In that future, are we still going to see single page apps, or do those other technologies take care of that? I guess in Cordova, what do you see there? Because I guess with the native platform, you've got caching, you've got transitions with your transition from one web view to another, or do you still see people sort of doing all of that transition work within a single web view?
Well, so the transition between pages creates a nice visual continuity for the user. But under the hood, it's basically like you've closed your app and you're restarting it again. I think there's still going to be that strong advantage for single-page applications in that they don't have to, clear out their entire JavaScript context and restart from scratch. If they want to save anything, you'd need to persist it and then read it out again. It's not a very good model. I'm actually really interested to see how these activity transitions will be used because I think single-page applications have a clear advantage.
I think about the problem with doing the single page app thing is that to do that and to have correct URLs, which you should, you sort of opt into the history state API, like push state, pop state, and you're also therefore opting into a lower quality of life. So I've never found those APIs have really worked correctly for me. What do you think? Is this something that we're going to see go away, or is that going to become a sort of deprecated model?
I just don't know. I don't know what's going to happen, and I'm excited about that. I actually am incredibly excited because navigation transitions and the team that's building it are going to enable regular content websites, people who aren't building single-page applications, who may not have the engineering team, who may not have the chops, to actually go build the same sorts of experiences with some of that lag, right? So there may be an advantage, but that's an advantage that you can pay for as you go. And I think that if you have a service worker installed, it may be the case that maybe you're in the same ballpark in terms of total performance. We don't know. I can't wait to find out.
We'll take a question from the audience.
You know, I wanted to validate what you said a second ago about the location on Google search. Anyone that knows me knows I probably am more Google connected than half the Googlers are, and I'm very trusting of the platform, and yet I found that subconsciously, that's one thing I've always done is denied that location request on the search page where I would never otherwise even think twice about it. All my devices are tracking me anyway. So I think you got a really good point there, just the context.
Yeah, I think we really need to keep hold of the contextual part of the permissioning model rather than sort of go to the sort of what Android does now. Maybe even we can get Android to come over to our side and do things the right way, right? How do we make sure that web APIs in the future aren't going to be constantly a year or two behind what operating systems have, what native applications have? Such as things like Apple Touch ID or the Apple Pay. How can we bring those kind of things to the web without this kind of massive lead time?
Yeah, so Alex and I talked about that a bit earlier, I think, and Mike also. Yeah, I mean, so, you know, in order to, we have to find a conduit to ship access to those faster. The current IDL conduit is kind of cumbersome for that because it doesn't scale. And so that's why we're looking at things like Navigator Connect. But that's just the tech. There's still the permissions aspect, right? Like I can wire up the USB port to my browser, but that's not me. That just doesn't mean I should. You know, I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Another component is just coming up with all the right primitives to have these spec discussions more quickly. If service worker it becomes the de facto target for events, that's one thing. Stream interface is another. All of these different things, and I think that we still have to go through the spec process, but we can just make it as efficient as we possibly can, so that there's not so much reinvention of the wheel each time.
Also, to finish up, we've got a kind of captive audience here. What do you guys want from developers to help move the web forward, or to make your jobs easier to move the web forward?
Please ask other browser vendors to push the web forward.
I guess for me, a good way of doing that is if with Service Worker, if you use Service Worker to make your stuff faster, then your sites are going to be faster in Chrome and in Firefox when they adopt it, and hopefully that will guilt the other browsers into to having to implement it so they'll be faster too.
It's
Yeah. Okay, that's all we have time for.